Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our more than almost 300 people online from some 60 plus countries, including 50 from Indonesia. So what's happening in Indonesia we have. And we have more than almost 400 people registered in person today, which says everything from more than 96 countries and 2 overflow rooms. So this is a jubilant day and a monumental day. And imagine our downtrodden faces if we all were here and the outcome up the road had been different. But it's a monumental moment. I'm Ellen Roskin from the Global Health Center, and we're really happy to welcome all of you and our amazing panelists. It's a real honor to listen to the level of the speakers that we have today. We are going to have a quite simple format. We're going to have 2 panels, and after each panel will be a 15-minute Q&A discussion with the audience, including the online audience. So please, if you're online, use the chat box to put your questions in. You can also send a question to a particular speaker if you want. And then we'll switch and have a second panel followed by another 15-minute Q&A. And that will be the event. So it's great to see so many wonderful people and old friends and colleagues who have turned out. And I would, at this point, I know you didn't come to hear me, so maybe next time. But I will turn it over to a more important speaker, the Right Honorable Helen Clark, co-chair of the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response, which hereafter we will refer to as the Independent Panel, because there are 3 Ps, and I always forget one of them. So off we go. Helen?
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you to the Global Health Centre for co-sponsoring this event with the Independent Panel, and thank you to the Graduate Institute for hosting us. I bring greetings from President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, my co-chair. She's in California, which I suspect is somewhat warmer and drier than here in Geneva today, but like all of us, she sends happiness about it being a good day. And we couldn't necessarily have foreseen that this would be a good day. There was, you know, many a slip twixt the cup and the lip, as the old saying goes. But here we are, and the agreement text has been gavelled through, and we move on. And let me give a big shout out to Precious Matsoso in the front row. So Precious, of course, was on the independent panel. She had to take leave because she had very important duties this last 3.5 years. But Precious, your work has materialised in what is not only, you know, a very positive development in global health, but actually helps us believe that multilateralism can deliver some results with persistence. So thank you so much for that. Other panellists here today, Michelle Kazakhskin, who we'll hear from soon, Anders Nordstrom has joined the panel, Raj Punjabi, both very involved with the work all the way through from 2020. And as you may have noticed, our panel has continued to be active because people saw a need for a constructive and positive voice about what needed to be achieved in new legal arrangements around pandemic preparedness and response. And a year ago, the successful renegotiation of the IHR was celebrated, and here we are today with good news from the agreement. And the agreement is, it's a Christmas tree which will need a lot of decoration put on it over time. It is a framework agreement. When we released the panel report, COVID-19, Make It the Last Pandemic in May 2021, we called for the negotiation of a framework convention under Article 19 of the WHO Constitution. So we're all aware that so far so good, but there's going to be a lot of work to do, not least in getting the PABS Annex negotiated, because ratification will not start until after that has been agreed. And also there's a lot that comes out of the agreement now that has to be further developed. For example, what will the financing coordination mechanism look like? You know, what will be the shape of the COPs? You know, what will be monitoring? There's so many issues arise, but this is positive, right? These are the challenges that we like to have moving forward in a good direction. Look, obviously the agreement is reached at a time when global health financing has been thrown into crisis. The very sudden cuts have been very adverse, not only obviously for WHO, which is undergoing painful measures and budget changes, but also for particularly low-income countries who've been given no time to adjust to funding cuts. So, you know, we're at a crossroads, but we have to move forward. And as part of moving forward, the independent panel has brought for release today 4 new policy briefs across a range of areas on things that need to be tackled now. One of them deals with the financing issues, another with risk assessment and monitoring, a third on regional self-reliance for innovation and manufacturing of the essential tools like vaccines, tests and treatments. And then we continue to talk about the imperative of sustained high-level leadership. And another opportunity to get head of state and government attention on these issues is with the high-level meeting at the UN on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, due for next September. So much to do, but today is a good day. We celebrate, but we note the many steps now to be taken to deliver to us a new system that is much more fit for purpose than what we went into COVID-19 with at the beginning of 2020. So thank you once again, everyone, for coming. Great attendance, and we look forward to the sessions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Helen, and right that you're staying up on stage because you're going to be a member of our first panel. My name is Richard Horton from The Lancet. It's great to see you here in this room and in the overflow rooms. Thank you for bearing with us. Let me call up onto the stage, first of all, Precious. So give Precious another round of applause, please. Co-chair of the IMB, and Raj Punjabi. Please give Raj a big round of applause. Raj was formerly Senior Director at the White House in those halcyon days, and a Special Assistant to the President, when you could use that word, and a member of the independent panel. Now, what we want to do is to have some reflections about the past 24 hours and the context of the past 24 hours. So I'm going to start with Precious, because everybody wants to hear from Precious. Precious, you must have a sense of success and relief, I suspect. It's the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. Tell us how it is. You're amongst friends.
Good afternoon. I've lost
Tuesday, I think.
I've lost the sense of time. I must say thank you so much for inviting me. I was saying to Christine that I left just as the president of Tanzania was giving the speech online. So there is quite a lot of interest, and I'm quite pleased that what you've been advocating for as the IPPR, that you know, the highest level of in office, whether locally or globally, must take interest. And I've seen that demonstrated today, and I hope it can be sustained, and I hope it can continue. But, you know, the last 24 I was, for a minute, I thought it was not going to happen, I must confess. Everybody must know that we had this Slovakia drama. And my response was, perhaps maybe it has to be epic, you know? The way we conclude must be dramatic, it must make headlines. It can't just be ordinary, you know, the usual World Health Assembly stuff where we approve and so on. Something exciting had to happen. But what it demonstrated, which, and I don't know if there are EU member states in this room, it actually pointed to it's not just about negotiations, but these regional groupings and how they participate in multilateral organizations and how they engage and how decisions are made and so on. Because when we started and during the negotiations, we have understood that the European Union was negotiating as a bloc. And because it was negotiating as a bloc, I asked the question, how come the Slovakia issue happened? And how do we explain this multilateral arrangements, sovereignty, and also, you know, countries, because I guess a balance between exercising your right to vote as a member state, but also committing to original agreements where you had agreed that you'd negotiate as a bloc and that the EU was central and key. It was kind of confusing and we didn't know, and I was trying to reflect on the AU that I'm proud to say, and I say it everywhere, that we actually were able to show unity of purpose from the beginning. And we're able, through Africa CDC, bring health ministers on almost 3 times to meet and commit, to the common Africa position. And that was carried through up till yesterday. I was waiting to see one African country voting no, and there was none. And I was waiting also to see one country voting no, and there was none. And for those who abstained, I was actually pleased that for some of those who abstained, they actually explained why they did so. Firstly, they were still going through their own internal processes and they had not been given a mandate to vote. They came to the assembly understanding that the agreement and the adoption was going to be based on consensus, and they were not prepared. They had not been prepared to come and vote. And it was a handful of countries. But I guess there were 2 outliers who had principled position about the pandemic agreement. And I don't think we could do much about that. But I'm pleased that even in their case, they still did not vote no. So there is hope. There is hope.
We need hope. Precious, thank you. Raj, I want to come to you, and I've read this report, and I encourage all of you to take a look at this report from the independent panel. And it's not that I want to pour cold water on our sense of success and relief, but if you read this report, the reality is that medical countermeasures are just as much out of reach for the majority of the world's population today as they were yesterday and they were last year. There's no money, and the money that we do have is fragmented across many different financing mechanisms with a lack of coordination. And there's no independent accountability to hold the promises and commitments of states to account. So, is the world really a safer place today than it was yesterday?
Well, we have a lot more work to do to become safer. And let's just remember why all of this matters. Back in January 2021, I remember walking out of a hospital in Boston, getting my COVID-19 vaccinations in January of 2021. And the next meeting I went to was with Prime Minister Clark and with President Sirleaf. And it was for the independent panel. Precious was still with us then, about to embark on bigger journeys. And I remember looking across the video screen, because we were all, of course, on Zoom calls at the time, and struck by the fact that here I was in my late 30s getting a vaccination as a young, healthy man. And here was this extraordinary leader in Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and Helen Clark. And in one hand, in New Zealand, vaccines were likely to come out as they were in the United States. But in Liberia, where President Sirleaf was calling from, where I grew up, that was unlikely. And here's this grandmother of 12, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who arguably is one of the most powerful people on the continent in sub-Saharan Africa. And it took many, many more months before the people of Liberia and across sub-Saharan Africa got the vaccines. And in the meantime, not only did more people die of COVID-19, but the disruptions to the healthcare system I was seeing as then quickly became the president's malaria coordinator, saw how much the infections that were raging amongst community health workers were stopping malaria treatment from getting out to kids with malaria, women who were in the throes of complicated childbirths not being able to go to hospitals because they were being shut down. And why this treaty, this agreement matters now is because it does give us some hope that the world is not accepting that as normal. The idea that the most powerful nations in the world and those who are the most powerful within those nations are more likely to get access to vaccines, tests, and treatments is not than those who are less powerful is not normal. What is normal is the promise of being able to have a more equitable, fair, and more clear system, more efficient system. Now, to answer your question directly, Richard, we have more work to do. We've got an agreement that's in place. There are three key areas we've got to work on to ensure that that's being executed on. Number one is ensuring that there is independent monitoring and clear accountability. Number two is ensuring that financing is stepped up. That's very hard in this moment when overseas development assistance is being pulled back, not just by my country, the United States, but by several others. And it's critical because the World Health Organization is now facing its biggest cuts. And as someone who sits on the WHO Foundation board, I think Anil Soni, our lead for the foundation, is here, I can tell you that the WHO is more strained than ever. And that's why ensuring that assessed contributions are increased, as member states agreed to a few years ago, is going to be critical, as is harmonizing and leveraging other funds in the system. The third area that we need to focus on is increasing regional self-reliance. What does that mean? It means an entire end-to-end focus from research and development investment and innovation to enhancing manufacturing and ensuring that the delivery of countermeasures in the next pandemic occurs. And you know, it's good you brought up the AU, the African Union, because that is an example of a part of the world that actually has a quite unified and clear agenda. That ought to be supported.
Thanks, Raj. So I think we can agree that we have a firm foundation for the future. So Helen, let's look to that future. The next 12 to 18 months is going to be critical. We've got the high-level meeting in September 2026. Just give us your thoughts about the roadmap between now and that high-level meeting and what we need to achieve and how we can achieve it.
So on the roadmap, I think the South African presidency or chairmanship of the G20 is very important. South Africa has a very active health working group. Professor Michelle Kazachkine is representing me in the independent panel and some of the deliberations around this area. So there's definitely been a big reaching out of South Africa to get, you know, the range of voices and perspectives in, and we hope that will feed through not only to a good health minister's outcome document, but into the leaders' summit with some reference as well. So that process is ongoing through to November. September, I understand you have the beginning of the PABS negotiations here. Now, an issue will be, is it doable with the momentum now, having agreed the text of the agreement? Is it feasible to get it done by May next year or not? That will have a bearing, I think, then on the role that the high-level meeting plays, because the high-level meeting is due September next year. Now, if PABS is finished, the high-level meeting becomes an opportunity to push for rapid ratification, because this won't come into effect as an agreement, come into force until there's 60 ratifications. And that can take some time. And actually, I think a message we should send out to countries now is, look, you know what's coming down the track. Start looking at your national procedures and, you know, doing your national tests, and be ready to run on ratification when the annex is actually agreed, because it would be a tragedy to have more and more and more delay with a slow ratification process. Now, so if the PABS is agreed, then that becomes a rallying point for the HLM. If the PABS isn't agreed, then the high-level meeting is going to have to try and engage the attention of the highest levels of government at the UN General Assembly on getting it done. What we don't know about next year is the role of the G20, because in theory it goes to the United States of America. Will they take the chair next year, or will it pass to someone else? If they take the chair, what hope for any of this? That's an open question. I'm not a diplomat, so I can put this question on the table. I mean, if they take the chair, it could be treading water for a year with G20. So a lot hangs on a solid base from South Africa this year, building on the Brazil effort on the regional mechanisms, and building on Indonesia before, which was the country that saw the pandemic agreement into place, and so on. So there's a number of points at which I think we could, you know, be rallying, just depending on how much progress is made on the PABS.
Okay, that's very clear. Let's turn to the audience. Please raise your hands and a microphone will find you, I understand, and then please say who you are and then your question. Who'd like to go first? And we have online questions as well, if people would like to submit them. So, who's going to ask the first question? I can't believe this audience. Yes, there, in the middle, please. Wave your hand. Again, keep waving.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Rachel Crockett from Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. So we are a not-for-profit R&D organisation, and we did some work on developing therapeutics for COVID-19 as well. So thank you to the panellists. I'll kick us off because I think we're talking about implementation. We have this agreement that will be absolutely nothing on paper if it's not actually implemented. So my question is surrounding what does the panelists, like what areas do the panelists really think that countries could coalesce around to start implementation? Because some of these areas don't need to wait until ratification to start implementation. You know, there's some key provisions in there that already have that shall do, like that shall, not will promote, will consider, like shall develop policies to attach conditions to R&D funding, for example. So what do we think, based on the negotiations as well, do we think countries could start coalescing around in this coming year? Thank you.
Well, no, thank you very much. And I think your question is relevant. When we're working on the resolution, we recognize that we couldn't await the process of having signatures and reaching the threshold before the pandemic agreement come into force and thereafter ratification. Of course, that's a long process. We added some language. It was kind of nuanced because we're very cautious. A language that allowed countries to start implementation, and we wrote it in a way that could encourage countries, but we were also mindful of the fact that we didn't want to undermine the actual coming into force of the pandemic agreement, because the risk is that, you know, some countries may say, do we really need to ratify? I mean, we've been doing this anyway, you know, and it will kill the collective effort that we really desire. So we wrote it in so that those kind of processes can begin. That's the first. And the second is that we, even though the focus of the IGWIC was on PAPS, we also incorporated provisions that allowed for preparatory work for COP, meaning we didn't have to wait for COP to be established and only start the work of all those administrative procedures and so on. Then I think that's the second one. The third, I think, is a tricky one. It's about the financing one, because we have the coordinating financing mechanism for IHR, which actually the provisions in IHR come into force in September. We thought we could actually start thinking about how we bring on board those that apply to the pandemic agreement, so that that work can also begin. And we also do not have duplication of effort and so on. So those are some of the things we thought about. And I would like to then use the G20, now that you mentioned it, the G20 role that South Africa will be playing. As you know, the theme for June includes a PPPR and the science and innovation. And one of the things that, and I was inspired by the 100-day mission, you know that it was difficult to include any language on accountability, monitoring, evaluation, and so on. So I see an opportunity, and given the experience we've seen with Rwanda and their response to Marburg, it kind of gives one a sense of hope that you could actually use those tools and test them, you know, because I can talk about the JEE. I implemented JEE, but when COVID struck, it was almost like a snapshot. It didn't give you a full picture, and you had a false sense of confidence, you know. So this one is a very effective measure. Of course, there are others, but I see an opportunity during G20 to start testing some of these ideas and look at what is implementable and what is not. So there is an opportunity there. And remember, G20 is expanded. It has AU, it has EU, and a whole lot of other countries. The other is what we said about the Brazilian agenda on local production. So we'd like to support that work so that it continues. I mean, it will align very nicely with the African Union agenda on diversified production.
Thanks, Precious. Helen or Raj, do you want to add to the point about implementation?
Just very briefly, I think Precious is absolutely right, that countries can look through the agreement and look at where the shells are and start working out what they need to do. And of course, also the IHR have implementation. So there's plenty to work on pending the document coming up for ratification.
I would only add that to the very good points made by my colleagues, that we have to remember pandemic preparedness, prevention, and response happens on the backbone of a healthcare system. And the healthcare systems in many places in the world that are most vulnerable to outbreaks getting out of control and becoming epidemics and potentially pandemics are the very places that have had their health systems gutted by the pullback in overseas development assistance. So if I was a head of state, if I was a finance minister, I'm not qualified to be either, but I would be calling my health minister up and asking what could we be doing now to mobilize domestic resources for health. And let's remember, in a crisis, and we have multiple crises happening at once, you have three options. You can go back, you can become weaker at the end of it, you could go back to where you were, that's not an option in this case, or you can try to get stronger through the crisis. What does stronger through this crisis look like when it comes to financing local health workers, medical supply chains, R&D and innovation? That is the backbone on which strong pandemic preparedness, prevention, and response will happen.
Thanks, Raj. Next question, please. Gentleman here on the right.
Hi, I'm Saul Walker from CEPI, and thank you to Precious for mentioning the 100-day mission. Just on that last point about strengthening health systems, traditionally, I mean, in high-income countries, you see health systems that also include innovation as part of a health system. In the changing world that we're seeing, increased drivers of poor health outcomes, whether it's climate or migration or whatever it is, we know that health systems are going to have to innovate to be resilient, and they need to do that locally. So how do we make the case for investments at a regional level in building that innovation capacity, and what can we be doing to support that?
Who wants to take that first?
Yeah, I'm happy to start off on this one. Thank you for that question. Look, I think first we've got to reframe investment in innovation and biomedical or in research and development, not simply as a medical issue or a matter of saving lives, but a matter of existential security, both national security and economic security for a country. That is the way we viewed it in the Biden-Harris administration. It's why we put forward a pandemic preparedness effort that was actually framed as a biodefense plan. Why was it framed as a biodefense plan? Not because we're trying to militarize health, but because we're making the argument that the security of a country depends on the investments it makes on advancing clinical trials quickly, so that when an emergency happens, you could stand it up in 14 days, that you could get a vaccine developed in 100 days. And I know Victor Zhao has been here, my friend and colleague, who's been championing the 100 days mission with CEPI and others for many, many years. We put that into policy, but we got bipartisan, conservative and liberal-minded politicians on board, not at the financing levels we wanted, but certainly more than we otherwise could have got if we had not framed it as a security issue. What might that look like in other parts of the world? In Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, when I have spoken with ministers, governments there who were stunned, despite having enormous wealth in, say, parts of the Middle East, that they could not produce vaccine locally, that they had to wait like everybody else to get vaccine there. They have gone forward and put together initiatives that are funded publicly. You look at Lifera, for instance, in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, that is investing in local talent, local research and development capability, not just fill and finish capacity. That is the essence of a bioeconomy that's needed. And if you ask those countries why they're doing it, it's not simply to be more prepared for the next pandemic. It's not simply to advance public health. It's because they see their GDP growth reliant on being competitive in biotechnology and the bioeconomy. We need to streamline pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response R&D into those national efforts to promote biotech investment. And that needs to happen in places, you know, like, again, where I grew up, or, you know, Precious, I know you're from South Africa. South Africa's shown tremendous leadership on that nationally. We need to be doing that across, you know, regions themselves. And this is why one of the core parts of that report from the independent panel calls for self-reliance.
Any quick additions to what Raj has said? Yes, go on, Precious.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. As you know, and I'll just add a little bit, and I saw Mary Angelo, investment is regulatory capacity, particularly in our region. We know that when product failure is reported, it's because your regulatory systems are weak. And I'm happy that there's that drive in the African region to ensure that there's confidence, in the products that are produced in Africa, so that they don't just produce them for Africa only, they should be able to distribute them elsewhere. And that kind of investment is necessary.
Absolutely. We've got one quick question online, and then I'm going to hand over to Anders.
Could you explain what has to be agreed before the signature ratification process can start?
I think it's as straightforward as saying that it's the pathogen access and benefit sharing annex, which has a lot of issues that have proved, very contentious among member states over the last 3.5 years. That's what needs to be settled. Ideally settled by the World Health Assembly next year, because that enables the ratification process to begin. But there's not going to be a ratification process on the basis of what was agreed today. It has to be that plus the annex. So at best, we'll be seeing ratification roll out from May next year. And I think, let's try to work to the best case scenario and avoid further delay.
Good. Precious, do you want to add something?
Yes, indeed. I think Helen is right that it's about ensuring that PAPs can be concluded as soon as possible. And perhaps I can take this opportunity to show the tensions. There's been an argument about whether do we invite experts to start working on the technical document and then invite member states to discuss the details and negotiate amongst themselves? Or do you get member states to submit their inputs and discuss, and only then would you invite experts? And that kind of tension, if it can be resolved as soon as possible, I think it would be helpful. And I guess if you brought in experts earlier, you'd probably be able to conclude much quicker. That's my view, but others hold different views, of course.
Thank you very much. It's the end of panel one. I'm going to hand over to Anders, but please give a big round of applause.
I will introduce you. Thank you. That was a good start of this, and delighted to see so many people here. I used to be the Swedish ambassador for global health. Now we are not going to speak about global health. We're going to speak about regional health. And I'm going to have basically just one question to my colleagues at the panel here. But we have been speaking about the importance and need to regionalize, to support and to work with regional structures. That was one of the recommendations in the initial panel report. What we've seen happening is as well, of course, in Europe, we have the EU. We do not always agree, unfortunately, which is an issue. The African Union is really much stronger now, if we look back 10 years, very much stronger. We have the ASEAN, we have the Gulf CDC, we have got PAO since decades. So we have a lot of regional structures that are in place. Now we're going to discuss about whether this is the future. Whether the future is regional health and not global health. And I'm delighted to have 4 colleagues and friends with us today. Mariangela, first congratulations now to be the Vice Minister and the Minister of Health in Brazil, but you're also a very well-known person when it comes to health globally. Michelle, one of the members of the panel and also associated here with the Graduate Institute, but also the former head of the Global Fund, etc. Very much welcome, Michelle, as well. Eloise, one of the strongest advocates for pandemics from the Pandemic Action Network. Again, delighted to have you with us. And Dia from Indonesia. We already met this morning where we discussed something else, but you're coming then from the Indonesian Strategic Development Initiative Center. So delighted to have you here and also to have the leadership from Indonesia to talk about this. So you got some questions and you provide some answers, but I've got just one simple question. And basically there could be a yes or no, and then we can end this discussion. So my question is then, people at the global level, global actors, are they prepared to let go? You understand what that means? To let go. To let go to regional actors instead. Are we prepared to give up powers, financial resources, to let go to regional structures instead? And the next question, and then it's a yes or no from you. The second question is about, are countries then ready to take what I call le baton, to pick up now the opportunity, which is really there in terms of the political platform at the regional level? Are countries now, government prepared now to continue to engage in that political process, but also to put the financial resources behind that? Because money is power. And money is one of the critical elements here. Because why do we have the global structures today? That's because of the flow of money. Do we have the opportunities now, and do you believe that we can actually change this from global health to regional health? Mariangela, please.
Oh, thank you, Anders. And he sprung this question on us just a few minutes ago, you know. And first I have to pay a tribute to Richard's ability to jump, and also for Helen. You know, I got an injured knee, but you jumped from this. Really, you're really well. But anyway, I think this is a key question, especially, it's not a yes or no, you know. No, it's not a yes or no. You know, because we just, I'm speaking on favoring multilateralism, you know, I think it's the way forward at the global level, right? And the pandemic agreement we just agreed upon yesterday, is a proof to that. You know, because there are national responsibilities and regional responsibilities. I believe that the regional has more complexities, as much probably as the global, you know, but both are needed, you know, because we need as country to respond, but we also need international agreement. Because when you're, like Raj was speaking about R&D capacity, you know, I truly believe this. And I've been working, you know, at national level, at state and city level in Brazil, and then global level. I was with WHO, with Readiness, and everything you said. And now I'm back with the government again. You know, I never thought I would be a .gov again, but I am. Yeah. Well, we do what we have to do, right? No, but no, but you know, I think local production or regional production is something. At this time we're doing this, there is the G20 coalition on local and regional production going on, and the countries are signing into it. Indonesia and South Africa and other countries are part of this initiative. But there's so much that you can do at country level. And R&D is one of the things that are, you know, I'm more worried about capacity to copy what's already developed, you know, and do safe and quality assured products than about developing, reinventing the wheel everywhere. You know, we don't need that. We need to recognize what are global public goods and then make sure they are available at country level.
But Marianne, can I ask you, I mean, during the G20 Brazilian presidency, you agreed on this global coalitions for regional manufacturing. Why do we need a global coalition for moving at the regional level?
Because it's extremely important, actually. Thank you for the question. Because, you know, we, after the pandemic, especially before the pandemic, there was a lot of interest in local production. But, you know, after the pandemic, every country wanted to Yeah, and we heard about state level wanting to produce, right? So, and we cannot have everyone producing everything. That's not going to happen.
But can't you sort that out within the region?
Not likely, because it's not a regional only.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. Should we move on to Michelle? I mean, you've been one of the key actors sitting on all the money from the Global Fund. you had quite
significant money.
Yeah, you had quite significant money. Do you think that some of the global actors today are prepared to let go and rather having the money to flow to regional structures instead?
Well, first, let me say I fully agree that we have to move towards more regional self-reliance. National and regional self-reliance, and R&D and manufacturing, as we talk about pandemic preparedness and response, here are absolutely key drivers of that regional self-reliance. But I can't see a world that is just a juxtaposition of regions without any glue, without any coordination, without any compass. So there's one institution that should not go, and that's WHO, because we need the vaccine blueprint, we need the pre-qualification, we need the normative role, and I think our panel, Anders, has kept saying that WHO should refocus its mandate, its work on its normative mandate.
Michel,
now,
you didn't mention money.
No, right. Now, the Global Fund and Gavi, let's see what will happen with them as we restructure the global health, but clearly global health will in the future not look like top-down constructions that it has been, with money flowing from Geneva to various places, but the global money, international money, will be there to complement the national and the regional efforts. That's how I see it. But that international money will still be needed because global health is also about global solidarity. And if we just leave countries or some sub-regions, to manage by themselves, we'll go nowhere.
But isn't that global money, hasn't that global money been a problem? I mean, what we see right now in terms of countries being dependent on the global money, is that the future also?
Well, first, let's not forget how that global money, and particularly the global money of the Global Fund has come up. We were responding to an emergency, the AIDS emergency. Remember, in 1998, 1999, people were dying. I mean, teachers were dying faster in Africa than they were coming out of schools. Societies were being disrupted. Kofi Annan said that AIDS is killing more people on the continent than all of the conflicts together. So we had to respond to an emergency. And the world came together and designed the Global Fund. And as a movement of solidarity, build that fund. It wasn't a fund that was designed to substitute for countries in funding their global health programs.
So let's come back to this question, whether the solution in the past is also the solution for the future. But let's come back to that question. But Eloise, what's your view? Do you believe that what we've been arguing for now in terms of regionalization and stronger regional ownership, power, will that become a reality?
Is it on? Oh, there we are. Will it become a reality? We have an opportunity for it to become a reality. But to your question about should we let go globally, well, certainly not of the framework that's just been built in terms of the pandemic agreement. That's our silver lining of multilateralism we absolutely have to hold on to. And when you talk about the letting go financially, look at the irresponsible letting go and slash and burn of ODA in different countries. We're in a very uncomfortable place in which we know that there are modernizations and ways in which we need to reform to support the regionalization agenda and the country agenda. but we certainly shouldn't be doing it at the pace and with the disregard being done at present. So what does that mean? It means that any time we engage in multilateralism, as with the pandemic agreement, the national sovereignty element is clearly stated and at the heart and should give some pushback to those that claim that it goes beyond that. But in terms of financing, we have to have a more honest conversation, I think, about what the future looks like. And we have to have a conversation and take action to make sure that global entities are really empowering national level works and regional level works. There's a huge opportunity with the Africa Epidemics Fund, which is mentioned in this excellent report that you should all definitely read. And so there are regional efforts that need to be supported better. And I think we're in this tension between the excellent work that some global entities do to fill a gap. And so what do you do about that? You can't cut it away and risk lives. But we have to have like a 10-year, 15, 20-year conversation about powering that down and getting towards proper national level and regional level intersectionality. I would also absolutely support what you said about the glue and the global, because we can't just have a fight of the regions. We need to have connectivity between regions. One of the biggest learnings from the COVID pandemic was there's no region, definitely no country, and certainly no region that can do it all themselves. There are global supply chains, and the problem we have now is that regions like Africa don't have enough skin in the game, enough assets to put on the table, enough power to be part of that negotiation.
But can they get that, take that, without, again, us letting go? I'm going to come to Indonesia now about the Pandemic Fund. You were part of that when you were chairing the G20. We are still focusing on mobilizing resources at the global level and then letting the global resources come down to countries and regional level. Shouldn't we mobilize resources at the regional level and keep them there instead? Because money is power. I mean, I agree that there are global functions absolutely given, like the pandemic treaty, but that's something else. But this is about, do we really believe that we will have regional platforms that will be the key actors when it comes to vaccines next time, having the money, the purchasing power? What do you think?
I think it's not so much about are global level willing to let go or not, or whether regional level is readily letting go or national level claiming the space. I think it's more about balancing the dynamics, leveling the playing field so everyone can have, a healthy dynamic.
You're very diplomatic.
Well, I think I have to, right?
Not necessary.
No, but I truly believe that. It's not about one player letting go and the other player saying yes. It's about an agreement where everyone sits on the table, discuss, and agree that this is the new playing field, the new dynamics. I think it's more about that than about one part saying, I'm going, and the other part saying, yes, we let you go. So it's from national level perspective, of course, there are responsibility that we have to fulfill more than before. And also at the regional, global, regional, and national level, the regional level has to be brought in or nudged or coaxed in more. So they play a bigger role. And that is giving space to level the playing field. And also the ASEAN in this case, and also the OIC, of course, also is a part of the dynamics in the region where I come from. And also, from national level, I commend my government's move in shepherding the pandemic fund to move forward and to take the leadership in the pandemic fund. But I think it shouldn't stop there, Anders. It should be right now when things come to shove, I think then it has to be, okay, what will be implemented at national level? How can the catalytic fund receive from the pandemic fund then let the floodgate open for other for other national and civil society engagement further into our national implementation in health.
Thank you. I'd like to get back to a little bit discussion about where ASEAN is, PAO is, the European Union is, but I'd like still to push my questions once more, and then I will give up in some way, perhaps. And asking you, the audience here, do you believe that the ones that are behind the money that is sitting on the power today, mainly channeling those money, come from Gates Foundation, come from Sweden, come from Germany, from the US, not so much any longer, but they might come in the future. Are they prepared to give up that power and instead let regions to take the lead, countries to finance this rather than keeping the power at the global level? Who believes that the global actors will give it up? Prepared to give it up? Up your hand if you believe that they will. There is one who believes that that will happen. Okay. Second question then, do you believe that countries themselves are prepared now to continue, and we'll talk a little bit about the regional structures in a minute here, but really to put power, political power behind the agenda now about regionalization, political power, but also the financial resources behind, because again, money is power, and I'm speaking mainly about the money, not the normative and technical functions, but the money in order to be able to have the purchasing power next time. Do you believe that countries are prepared now to step up? Great. More hands. I'm very happy. Thank you. Coming back to a little bit on the regional structures, just to get a little bit of insight. We spoke to ASEAN, but coming back to Mariangela about PAHO. I mean, that PAHO has been in place for a long time. Are the discussions ongoing within PAHO to see, from member states' perspective, what role should PAHO play? Can PAHO become even more useful, especially around, now we talk about the medical countermeasures and what is going to happen next time?
I think PAHO, I used to joke about, but I'm serious about it. PAHO is the great-grandmother of UN bureaucracies, and WHO is the grandmother. And the other day someone told me...
Richard, don't write that.
Yeah. The other day someone told me, no, that PAHO now is the mother. So, okay, because they are making it faster. PAHO has a joint procurement for the region that's really working for a long time. For vaccines and for strategic medicines. So I think it's a solution. Because no countries, Brazil, for example, uses PAHO rotating fund for vaccines, some of them. So it's something that we need more, because it's not enough to have the product, but it's also you need smaller countries or smaller economies, be them rich or...
But have there been any discussions after the COVID pandemic in terms of how one can improve those structures, strengthen the structures within PAHO, within the region?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's important, because I came to recognize PAHO's advancements when I actually came to WHO, and I saw the difficulties that other regions had. And I see that ASEAN is trying to get organized on this, and that the African CDC is also organizing. And I'm talking about something very concrete, which is procurement.
Yeah.
This is key to ensure access. And then countries, if now I'm not saying, I don't also want to take out the responsibility of rich countries of funding. That's not what I'm talking about, high-income countries, to be more polite, but helping fund national responses where needed. But countries also need to step up, right? And I think we are on the verge of a new global order, world order.
Yeah.
And this is the time now.
Thank you. Michelle, you are now living in Switzerland, but you are still, I think, a member of the European community. So a little bit of reflections from your side in terms of what happens more at the regional level within Europe. I mean, a long time ago, the political sort of power moved from WHO to the European Commission instead. During the COVID, we saw how now the Commission took the lead to make sure that we had access to vaccines. We enter into agreements for 5 times as much as vaccine that we needed. What is your reflections on the future when it comes to collaboration within Europe?
there's institutional collaboration, and then there are political challenges within Europe. So that's the short answer. But clearly, health that was not in the mandate of the European Union, it remains with a sovereign mandate of member states. Health is more and more moving towards being a European Union's and the Commission's mandate. We've seen it, as you said, with the procurement. We see it with the EU for Health program. We see it with HERA, the new agency that is supposed to mimic, but a much, much, much smaller scale, the BARDA. And I think European citizens agree that this is a direction we should take. However, I'm worried about the cohesion and of the European Union, and with the recent elections going one way or the others, and some passing, just by a few % majority, I'm really concerned about whether the European Union will remain together. The hope, I think, is with now UK somehow coming back to the Union.
That is news.
Germany, France coming better together. Spain, Portugal, moving forward fast. And of course, the Nordic countries always as solid as they have been. But then to the east, I'm sorry to say, Italy and the recent election in Romania, the uncertainty in Poland, Hungary, of course, and Slovakia. These are matters of concern.
So we have a bit of challenges at home.
Yeah, we do.
What about ASEAN, Dia? ASEAN has not been known for a regional sort of platform, political platform to prioritize health. Has that changed?
Yes, yes and no. I think there is still room for improvement. We have the AFCIT, which was started, that is for vaccine manufacturing in a more regional way, so not to only rely on biopharma, but also the capacity, drawing on the capacity of Vietnam and Thailand as well. So Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. That was started, I think, a few years before the ASEAN summit a few years ago. But progress has been slow. And I think it is because as a regional platform, ASEAN has never been put and pushed to think in a strategic direction for health. Countries within ASEAN, we do our own health efforts. And we rarely share in the same platform. Perhaps leaving the WHO regional offices out. So we share through WHO, but not through ASEAN. So now it has to change for the better, and that to increase countries' capacity also, but also to strengthen the ASEAN as a regional platform.
Very good. And you're also moving now from zero to VIPRO. That's yes. Also a political move. I will leave Eloise out now because letting you instead answer the questions from the audience. So that will be your task. So should we open up for...
Anders, could I just make two quick points?
No, please. And then,
the first is, let's be careful also about what we call regions, yes? Yeah. China is a region and also a country. Yeah. India is a region and a country. So that's why in our report we talk about regions/sub-regions. That's the first thing. And second, someone already mentioned in the first panel that Africa has really come together politically, although so diverse, around very ambitious continental plans for self-reliance. Yeah.
And we have countries that are not falling within any one of those political regional platforms. We had many hands. Great. We start there.
Hi,
Your
everyone.
name, please. Just.
Yes, Nina Jamal with 4 Paws. I really love the title, Readiness in an Uncertain World, because in the current uncertainty and volatility, there are opportunities for transformation and stopping outbreaks before they become pandemics. When we think about what was agreed in the pandemic agreement, and we don't think about if we can stop the next pandemic, but how. The question is, where does One Health fit into the equation? Because this is the first time it's in a legally binding instrument. We see regions here who are champions on One Health. We see a vice minister not only of health, but also surveillance and environment, which is a holistic approach. So how does this change the way we approach tackling pandemics in the regions?
Thank you. Let's go for next question. Let's try to focus a little bit of this regional dimension, if you can, in your questions. Please, gentlemen at the back. Yes. And then we go to...
Thank you. Thank you, panel.
Amita
Sarkar from Tampere University. My question is that, well, power is secured and stable when it is shared and comes via constitutional and legal routes. So in that case, how do you all see that the current approved pandemic accord text will help, and as well as even perhaps COP will help to correspond with the national entities in demanding, in generating legal architecture, per se for surveillance architecture, per se for public financial management system, social security, and then probably that regional collaboration, it will be helped. So I would like to have an answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
What impact the agreement will have on national legislations? Yes, please.
Hello, thank you. My name's Carrie. I'm an infectious diseases registrar from Australia. I'm here with the World Medical Association Junior Doctors Network. I was a frontline health worker during the COVID-19 pandemic, alongside many of my colleagues, some of whom are in the room today. But like many other health workers, many of us are young and we do not hold the power when it comes to pandemic and other global health related policies and decisions. Yet health workforce issues are as urgent now more than ever, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. We face global health shortages. We have health workers around the world who are striking. My question is, what can be done on a regional level to address health workforce issues through the lens of pandemic preparedness and health systems strengthening, noting that there is no health without health workforce?
Thank you very much. And that's a given question then to Dia, because that is what we spoke about during this morning about health workforce.
I thought I could answer question number 2.
No,
but okay,
you've got
Anders.
number 3.
Yeah, okay. I think from human resource for health, countries need to start independently on how to strengthen and ensuring that data is available at national level first. I think that is first and foremost. If you need a reference to that, then you can rely on the reference from WHO, the Global Health Workforce Strategy 2030. But again, that relates to question number 2, where national regulation is needed. So this is then at national level. The starting point is at national level. At regional level, cross-learning will be one ideal way, but also modeling, where a modeling from each of the country in the same region, let's say ASEAN, let's take ASEAN for example, and we can start from Indonesia, the model from Indonesia, the modeling from Thailand or Vietnam and others, and then we cross-learning, and then we come up with one regional HRH model that can predict or see the relevance, forecast the relevance of production, distribution, and inflows and outflows of health workforce. In 12, or in my country, in Indonesia, there are 12 different functions in a health workforce group. Perhaps in other ASEAN countries, there are different groupings. But also, we must not forget the community health workforce, the community health workers that are the backbone of ensuring that care can be reached and can be accessed by many. So that is one separate modeling on its own. And again, data, if we go back to data of community health workers in Indonesia is still not at the right place. So we start there first as a starting line, and then we cross-learning and cross-referencing between the countries.
We spent 2 hours this morning speaking about this, so we can continue on the health workforce. Extremely important.
For another 2 hours.
Yes, another 2 hours. Eloise, I promised you to now also to answer one of the questions. I'd like you to reflect on the first question about preparedness. And we spoke here about access to drugs, procurement, etc. But the treaty is also very clear about the importance of preparedness, of One Health. What do you think will happen? Will countries take this serious?
We hope so. I think to Nina's point about this prevention piece and how we, it's great we have the pandemic agreement and this is the day to celebrate. But in terms of prevention, we don't want to wait for a pandemic before we get super active. So what does that mean in terms of, if I'm thinking about that from an advocacy perspective, there are other avenues we can look at regarding prevention, the biodiversity processes, the COP processes. We have this increase in interest around the climate and health debate. Let's make that practical when it comes to disease spillover and the desertification agenda, because I think we're at risk of making that a new silo instead of looking at practical actions we can take to really tackle that prevention piece. So I think that's a really important point, and one that we should think about exporting the good work, if you like, of the pandemic agreement and the norms in there, but also taking it back to that prevention. There's also an increasing interest in surveillance. And I think there's a sort of mix of both the technical and the political work that needs to happen around kind of norm setting and data sharing and understanding how surveillance talks to each other in different countries. And that can be a really important piece. And then one shout out there was a post on LinkedIn around we already have a pandemic of H5N1 in animals. So why are we only thinking about this, should we apply it to animals? Because actually, if we did that, maybe we already have the framework that we need. So yes, we have One Health, but at what point do we declare a pandemic for the animal world? I'll just leave you with that thought, and we can tackle it later when we've had a rest.
Thank you. We have questions also online, but first, the third question then to Mariangela about taking this to national legislation. There's been a lot of misinformation out in terms of what this pandemic agreement means in terms of respecting national authorities, sovereignty, legislation, etc. And of course, it means this agreement means nothing. Not before it's been ratified, and not before some of this has also become national legislation, national law. What is your thinking in terms of now the pandemic treaty is here? Will you take some of this now and think about what you need to do in Brazil?
Yeah, absolutely crucial, the next steps, and I refer back to the question that Richard put in the beginning to Precious, whether this was the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning. Actually, here, I want to say something, cite Samora Machel, when he said, a luta continua, vitória é certa, which means the fight goes on and victory is ahead of us. But actually, the fighting goes on. And the victory is not certain. And we are not, I think, all the gains we have so far on global health, in national indicators, and everything is at risk. So we need to be very, very thinking forward, in ways to turn this into actionable things at country level. And let me just because I want to make a comment on the COP30, because it will be in Brazil, right? Mm-hmm. And we are really, really pushing in Brazil for Belém, which is the city where COP30 will be, to have a concrete plan of action. Action plan, health plan of action.
Really good.
So this is because health is actionable. And we need to enter the climate discussion. I think there's an increasing consensus that health and climate are connected. But we need to turn this into something that's actionable. The same thing we are planning with the pandemic treaty.
Excellent. And I can say what I was going to say at the end. You are most welcome to come back other discussions here. And tomorrow there will be two very important ones on the links in between health and climate, both early afternoon and late afternoon. So discussions to be continued. But you didn't answer my question. I mean, will you now be inspired by the pandemic treaty and take some of this to national legislation?
Well, Brazil was a strong partner in the negotiations, right? And there's a, well, you know, we are entering a presidential election next year, right? So when I say that nothing is guaranteed and that we need to keep our eyes open and our pushing forward, we need to speed up some of this, you know. But there is
so it's a half yes.
Sorry?
It's a half yes.
Yeah, 1.5 years.
1.5.
Yeah. Well, 1 year, yeah.
No,
Next year, election starts in, but the election is in October, in November in Brazil. Yeah. So it's 2027. So right now, we are already moving with policies and projects to strengthen the national capacity. Right? And we are facing a problem right now because we have avian flu in the south of Brazil. You know, so and we are facing it's the measles outbreak everywhere except in Brazil. You know, so it's
no, that's a big worry. That's a big worry. But I mean, the question is really about the pandemic treaty. Will that now inspire, help countries also to move, including on the legislation side? We'll see. But the questions from the audience, Ellen, please.
Okay, there are two. Would it be opportune to merge the IHR with the Pandemic Accord by 2030, as both are complementary and overlapping international legal instruments? We need a global plan for simulation exercises to test the accord and perhaps declare 2025 to 2035 the decade of pandemic preparedness, similar to other such decades of action.
But let's stay with that question. So this is a yes or no.
And there's one more
Should
after,
one now make IHR a protocol to the pandemic treaty and basically bring them together into one legal instrument? Yes or no? Mariangela?
I think of how long it would take to negotiate that. No.
So was that a no? That was a no. And Michelle?
Yes, I would agree. The function is, agree with no, sorry.
So no, another no.
These are two different functions. IHR is an internal protocol within the WHO community, and it doesn't have, whereas the treaty is obviously a political agreement. So
but
let's not go. But there are overlapping zones, but maybe that's not necessarily an issue.
But you could see an architecture where you have a framework convention and you have protocols like you have on the climate conventions. Yes. You have the Kyoto Protocol linked then to the convention.
Then I would pass the microphone to Haik Nikogosyan, who is sitting here, who designed the FCTC, and who is really the expert on the legal aspects to this. I can't
Eloise,
answer.
you're not a lawyer, but what do you think? Should we bring them together?
I'm not a lawyer, but I have a strong view. We've had the pandemic agreement for 3 hours. I think we need to bank it. The IHRs are a success. Let's bank it. We have many, many more things to do to put them into action.
So we have 3 no's to that question. What about Dia?
Agree with my fellow
So
panelists.
4th no. Then we go for next question.
Okay. But I think also I think some work has to be, and responsibility needs to be taken at the national level for the regulation. So whether it is combined at global level or not, the national level can actually make something at a national context that work at national level and then put it together at national regulation.
I was not allowed to vote, but you would have had a yes from me. Ellen.
Is the ODA crisis an opportunity, just as the AIDS crisis was an opportunity? Yeah. Is this the chance for low and middle income countries to overturn the global financial order that puts them at the bottom? A bit...
Yeah, but that's a big question. But let's have sort of 1 minute because we're coming to an end. We only got 3 minutes left. But what do you think? Is this just a crisis or is it also an opportunity now when the global financing is changing?
I think we need to see it as an opportunity. Otherwise, why are we here, right? So that's, but it's challenging, you know. But like I said before, a luta continua.
2 things. First, yes, the time is now to change. for sure. We will not stay with the current system, and we will not go back to where we were. And second, I don't like the word opportunity when actually people are dying.
Agree 100%. I think we have a chance to change structures. There's something called global public investment, but we need to protect that public investment and understand where it's going to come from. So let's not irresponsibly slash ODA budgets, but let's instead think about the national level articulation of something like global public investment so that countries have ownership, they have self-reliance, but they are also a bit able to tap funds, including precious grant funding that is still needed.
So I think we have 3 yes now. This is a bit different. Thea.
I think whenever people's lives are in jeopardy, we should not mention it as an opportunity. I think even one life is too precious to see as an opportunity. But with the current landscape, there is no other way but to step up and to change the strategy. If people would like to see it as an opportunity, then that is the opportunity to upend, to change the strategy, to balance out the dynamics, but not when it is at the cost of people's lives.
Thank you. I think one of the key takeaway for me is that dialogue, discussion, listening to each other, that's how we can make progress. And at least I appreciate a lot of this. So big thank you to all of you, the panel. And also, as I already said, there will be continued events, discussions, debates happening here. So check out the program and come back later on during the week as well. So big thank you to everyone.